Hey, everybody. I want to thank the worship team, both in the front and in the back, for helping us worship this morning. And thank you all for participating, joining in, and pouring your heart into it. I appreciate that. Behind me on the wall, you will see our 4 core values. You can think of these as the essential things, the things that we want to make sure that we focus on, the things that we want our church to be about. Believe, grow, belong, and serve are very simple words, but there's a lot of meaning wrapped up in every one of those words. As you dig down, the longer you think about each one of those things, you realize very quickly that they're very deep wells. There's a whole lot of aspects to each one of those, so much so that you may not have immediately been apparent, may not have immediately seen it at first. The more you think about each one, today I want to talk about, and I hope that you'll engage with me in looking at an aspect of belonging that often gets neglected. And oddly enough, it's not one of those pieces, it's not one of those elements of belonging that is subtle or obscure. It's actually something that the Bible talks about quite a lot, and yet we still miss it. Somehow we manage to read what the Bible says and overlook it. Our sermon series, Do We Really Believe This?, is all about getting us to re-examine those things that are in the Bible that we read all the time, that we say that we believe, and then giving us the confidence and the courage to go out and live like we believe them. And a few weeks ago, we looked at what it means to be a united community. And we saw how the Bible paints a very cool picture about we're not just supposed to be just a loose affiliation of people who get together on Sunday morning, but in fact, what we're supposed to be is a bunch of people who intertwine their lives, so much so that what affects one affects all. And that's the aspect of belonging that we need to take a closer look at today. How we respond when someone in our community struggles. The Bible has a lot to say about how we are to care for each other, take care of one another, and carry each other's burdens when we face difficulties so that we know that we don't face those difficulties alone. We are supposed to carry each other's burdens, and we are meant to live, actually, in an unburdened community. Now, the only way that's possible if we become people who carry each other's burdens. So, as we know, the Bible tells us, God tells us that we are supposed to love one another. The people of God are meant to love one another. We know that. We see it all over the place. 11 different times in the New Testament, the command, love one another, is explicitly stated. And on the night before Jesus is arrested, or at the night Jesus is arrested, before his crucifixion, he is meeting with his guys, and he is commissioning them. He's talking about what they need to be and who they need to be and what the future will look like after his crucifixion. And he says this very famous line in John 13, 34 and 35. You probably know that passage. You might have memorized it. It says this, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So Jesus commands us not just to love each other, but to love each other like he loves us. And we could camp out there all day. There is so much wrapped up in what Jesus just said. I don't think there's a more profound or more convicting or more challenging command from Jesus than that one. When Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, to me, that's actually easier than the second greatest commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. Because God is perfect and easy to love, but people, See, Jesus gives us this really good reason why we are to love each other, why it's so important that we, the body of Christ, love each other well. And it's not just how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. It's not just how great it is for us that we love each other and we're great, but it's actually, that's our testimony to the world. There may not be any greater apologetic for the fact that we follow a living God than how we love each other. That's the evidence that we can give the world that we serve a living God. But we can't just love by saying so. We can't just love by saying, "Oh, I love you," and that's enough. No, we have to love each other through our actions. In 1 John chapter 3, it says, "Dear children, let us love one another. Let us not love one another with words or speech, but with action and in truth." So what Jesus is commanding us to do wasn't just to be pleasant to each other on Sunday mornings when we get together. He was telling us that we need to intermingle our lives so much so that we can care for one another and help deal with each other's struggles. That's the whole idea. We need to take action in each other's lives. In Galatians 6, Paul writes this. It says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if you do not give up. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Now remember, when Jesus talks about a harvest, he's saying something very specific. He's talking about people. They're going to be gathered into the kingdom. So what he's telling us here is that we want to bring in the harvest. One of the things that we need to do is we need to love each other. We need to do good deeds. The good deed that we do is how we love one another. And that love cannot be passive. It can't be a matter of words. It has to be a matter of activity, action. You can't just shake somebody's hand and say, hi, how you doing? You have to get into their life and find out how you can find out how they're doing and then help. It's really important. See, it says carry each other's burdens. And man, that is a simple sounding idea, but it is not. There is a lot wrapped up in those few words. One of the things I like about the Bible is the economy of words. And so he writes so few words and yet says so much. You know what I mean? One of the things that he does, the Spirit says, carry each other's burdens. And the more you think about that, there's a lot there. For example, we all know that there are physical burdens we all have, right? Sometimes I'm sure you've had an experience where you needed a ride to the airport, or you needed someone to help you drop off your car at the shop, or you needed someone to come by and help you move some furniture, right? You've had those experiences, but maybe you've also experienced sometimes when, like, your lawn's overgrown and you're too sick to do anything about it, or maybe you've got a lawnmower that refuses to turn over. We understand the physical needs. We understand the caring for each other, the taking care of each other that way. There's plenty of things that you just cannot do by yourself. It takes more people than just you to do it. And sometimes you need someone to come alongside you and just do it for you because you're too beat up, too worn out, too exhausted, or just don't have the means, right? So we get that. We understand that. Sometimes the burdens that we carry for each other are literal physical burdens. But sometimes it's a financial burden. Sometimes one of the things we need to carry are those situations. I'm sure you've been in those situations before where you were struggling and you needed someone around you to come alongside and maybe take care of a bill or two, or buy you some groceries, or put some gas in your car. No, that's just me. Am I the only one who struggled that way? I certainly have. Maybe you've been in a situation where it goes deeper than that, and somebody helped you get a job, or they let you come and stay with them for a while until you got your feet back under you. See, carrying each other's financial burdens is unbelievably important. It is what the church is supposed to do. The church should be your go-to group of people when you have a financial need. Not the church, the organization, but the church, the people. That's what the church is called to do. Jesus says in Matthew 5, give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You know, carrying each other's financial burdens is a lot more taxing somehow than carrying the physical burdens. I don't know how, but it is. It seems like it's heavier, but that's a good thing because it means that much more when you do it. But even harder than that are the emotional burdens that we have to bear. Helping someone deal with frustration or anxiety or anger or grief or depression or loneliness or resentment can take a lot out of you. A lot of work, but it is really, really good work. I mean, it's really valuable work because we can't pretend that the emotional weight that we all carry isn't a burden. It very much is. And we would be so much better. We would love life so much more. Life would be easier to walk through if we had people around us who could help carry some of that weight. And that's exactly what the church is supposed to do. We are supposed to shoulder each other's emotional burden. That's what we're supposed to do. And I know for some of you, that is a really uncomfortable call. That's an uncomfortable charge. You have no problem at all if someone says, man, I need some help cutting down some limbs, or can you make me some meals? You'd be right there. I mean, you would jump on that. Yeah, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? But if somebody comes to you and lets you know that they're struggling, they're having a hard time, and you realize that what they're talking about is this heavy emotional stuff, you may be more hesitant. And that might be because you don't know what to say, or it might be because you don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's just as likely that you just don't feel comfortable. You're more comfortable with the physical than with the emotional. Heck, you're more comfortable with the financial than the emotional. Buy you something. But what the church is called to do is sit with each other, to listen to each other, to let someone unburden their heart to you and maybe offer them a different perspective. Maybe redirect them back to Jesus. That's one of the burdens that we have to bear. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, "Therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing." I get the sense from many, many American Christians that they don't have anyone, they don't feel like they have anyone who they can talk to, that they can really share their inner heart with, that their deepest self. And they feel isolated because of it. They don't have anyone who helped them cope with those negative emotions that are weighing down. And listen to me, listen. The weight that is on your heart is just as heavy as the weight on your back. It can crush you the same. The church is responsible for that weight, for each other. Finally, the most neglected burden, spiritual burden. Remember that story in Exodus 17 where God commands Moses to go up on a hill and raise his staff above his head while the Israelites are fighting the Amalekites? And as long as his staff is up, the Israelites fight well, but as soon as Moses' arms get tired and he starts to drop that stick, then the Amalekites start beating them. Well, so what do? Well, Aaron and Hur go out and they get a rock and they put it under Moses and they let him sit down on the rock for one. And then they stand one on the other, one side, one on the other. Aaron on one side and Aaron and Hur on the other, and they prop his hands up. They hold him up. And the reality is every last one of us is fighting a spiritual burden right now, fighting a spiritual battle that most people don't see. And we need some people to come alongside and prop us up and help us out, keep us going. The problem is that most of us try to fight these spiritual battles alone. That's just foolish. We're supposed to be the community of believers. We're supposed to be the people of God. We're supposed to fight for each other. And yet, how many of us are sitting at home struggling, dealing with our doubt, our depression, our sin that we can't seem to overcome, that habitual sin that you keep so long it's like a pet, that problem in your life that you just can't overcome, that fear that Satan keeps coming after you, and you're trying to overcome the enemy. I love what Dave said this morning, the foolishness of thinking that you can defeat the enemy on your own. The one who defeated the enemy is Jesus Christ. But he has sent you to go remind me that the one who fought Satan is Jesus Christ, not me. Spot on, brother. Absolutely true. See, the reality is there are husbands and fathers in this room who are fighting for their families, and they need some guys to come along and prop them up. There are some wives and mothers who are fighting for their children, and they need some women to come along and carry some of that burden. We need to fight these spiritual battles for each other, the battles of sin, the battles of doubt, the battles of just apathy. Because honestly, doesn't it get tiring fighting this war? Keeping going? Wouldn't it be better if someone came alongside and said, let's go together? We need to come alongside our brothers and sisters and share the load. Philippians 2:4 says, each one of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. 1 Corinthians 10 says, nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. We need to help each other out, physically, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. It's required of us. Here's the deal. I know that that's a lot to carry. I know that that can be exhausting. But it's only exhausting. Well, let me say this. You see in Galatians 6 where it said, do not be weary of doing good. We have to be commanded to not give up because we're going to get tired. We're just going to get worn out. And Paul repeats himself in 2 Thessalonians 3. He says, as for you, brothers, never tire of doing what is right. We have to be commanded to keep going because the reality is you're going to get worn out, and you're going to get worn out if you're the one person helping that other person. See, the burden is only too much for one of you or for two of you if it's only two of you, right? The problem here is that we try to be heroes. You're not supposed to be a hero. The secret to unburdened community is community, right? The whole idea here is that many hands make light work. So we spread the need around. And so when you're feeling strong, you help out more people. And when you're feeling weak, people help you out. But it's not one-on-one. It's all of us together. We know each other's lives well enough that we are taking care of each other. We're looking out for each other. That way, everybody gets the encouragement they need. Everybody gets the work done that they need. Everybody gets the resources they need. Everybody gets the rest that they need so that they can get strong, so they can get back in the fight and help somebody else. Romans 12 says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Hospitality, remember that? That old school value of having people in your life and in your home. He goes on in chapter 13 to say, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. That love must be active. Now, that's the easy part. You ready for the hard part? For our body, for this church, the hard part is this. A few weeks ago, I mentioned how I know a lot of people who, if there is a physical need, they will jump right up, jump right in, put their hand to the work and get it done. But if there's, something that they may be dealing with, something burden that they may have, they're a lot more hesitant about talking about it. And I said, did anybody else sort of struggle like me where you'll help somebody else out, but it's a little bit more difficult to let somebody know what you're going through? And like you're doing right now, a whole lot of you nodded and smiled, and some of you raised your hands. Notice that Jonathan's not here this morning. He's one of those guys that will do anything for anybody, but won't ask for help. He's down today. Miss you, Jonathan. He's down today because he did all that work and he needed help. It was hard to ask for help. And pick on him because I'm the same guy. Does anybody see the fundamental flaw in this whole thinking? Does anybody see the deception that's going on here? I mean, if everything we just read in Scripture is true, if we are supposed to be this close-knit, caring community that gladly carries each other's burdens and takes care of one another, but we're also the same people who won't tell anybody what we need, we're kind of stuck, right? Let's say we all heartily agree that we wanted to not just say that we believe this stuff, but actually do what it says, to live it out, to look out for people, to take care of them, to lift them up, to encourage them, to take care of their financial, physical, emotional, spiritual battles, to do the thing for them. But we're absolutely not ever going to let anyone know what we're dealing with. Do you see what that does to the church? The problem is, as hard as it is for people to ask for help, as difficult as it is a really, really big problem for the church because, as I was plotting out this sermon series, I thought that talking about how we need to ask for the help that we have, for the problems that we have, would be a nice light thing to talk about after we talked about the heavy subjects of money and politics. But the more I've looked into this, the more I've prayed about it, read about it, the more I've thought about it, I realized that this is a major, huge issue for us and in the church in America. Because, this is a heavy deal, because let's think about this. If we are not willing, if I am not willing to let you know what my burdens are, what my needs are, then you cannot be the people that you are called to be. In other words, if we are unwilling to share our burdens with others, then we are limiting the church and keeping it from being everything it's supposed to be. Kind of a big deal. So maybe we ought to take this more seriously. This idea that we need to be open about our struggles, that we need to ask for the help and accept it more willingly. What keeps us from asking for help? Well, there's a few things. The first thing is that some people just don't make their needs known because they fear that nobody really cares. They simply don't think that anyone is going to care about what they're going through, and so they're going to feel rejected if they bring it up. And that's really heartbreaking that people would have such a low view of themselves that they would think that no one would care. But it's even more heartbreaking that the people in their lives have given them evidence of that. That there's people in their lives that should be there for them, but have told them basically, proved to them basically that they don't care. So we have a very important job as a church. Our job is to make sure that every single person knows how important they are and how what they're struggling with is our burden too. It is so important that we make people know that they matter, not just to God, but to us too. Another reason people don't say what they need and express their concerns, their struggles, their burdens, is because they themselves don't want to be a burden. Now, that's a pretty common one. You ever heard somebody say, I just don't want to be a burden? You probably are thinking that yourself right now, because that's one you hear all the time. And if that's you, let me just say something to you, and I need you to hear me on this. You are not a burden. You are burdened. It doesn't make you weak or flawed. That doesn't make you a problem. That makes you an opportunity, that gives us an opportunity to love you well, to take care of things for you. People need to care about you. We do. We do. We're just not great at showing it. So what we need to do as a church is we need to let people know what we're going through and know that that doesn't make us a burden on them. See, I know that some of you are thinking, man, the world is so full of problems and everybody's got a heavy weight to carry, and I just don't want to add to that. You are not a burden. You are burdened. Let us carry some of your weight, because then you get stronger and you can you can help someone carry their weight. That's kind of what we do. The most troubling reason people don't make their needs known, though, is plain and simple pridefulness. Some people will not ask for help or let people help because they think that letting people know that they struggle is letting them know that they're incapable or that they're inferior. Guys, we have a real problem with this. Guys, men, we have a problem with this. We get into our minds, this idea that if I have to ask for help, then somehow I'm weaker or less. I don't know where we picked that up, probably in fifth grade playground. But you're not, and it's your pride that's getting in the way. Pride is a destructive force, and if you let your pride keep you from admitting what you're struggling, you are going to suffer, and the people around you are going to suffer. You are going to set yourself up for a greater fall. If you have a habit of keeping if you have a habit of keeping your needs, your burden, your struggle to yourself, you need to check your heart right now, and you need to decide, is it because I don't think anybody cares, or is it because I don't want to be a burden, or is it because I have a pride problem? And if it's any of those three reasons, you need to know that God calls us to be the church that cares for each other, that carries each other's burdens. You've got to let us help you get past that. If we want to be the community that Jesus came to establish, we have to carry each other's burdens. We have to. It is imperative. It is who we are. No one struggles alone. No one struggles alone. And the only way that happens is if you let us know what you need. Get into each other's lives. We intertwine our lives so much that what affects one affects all. Here's a crazy thought. What if we learned to accept help from others before it became a struggle? What if we learned to accept help and partner with each other before it became so overwhelming that we had to ask for help? What if we learned to intertwine our lives so much that we actually became an unburdened community because all of the burdens are so easily spread around, that everybody's glad to pitch in and help out? The world and its problems are too big. Here's the thing. The world and its problems are just too big for us. War, disease, and natural disasters, and poverty, and all kinds of human suffering is swirling around us all of the time. The 24-hour news cycle and the technology has allowed us to become aware of every catastrophe, every horror, every evil done all over the world, all of the time, almost immediately, on your phone, in your pocket. And that's too much. Just too much. The human heart, somebody said that the human heart is not designed to bear the weight of all of the trouble in the world all at once. That only God can do that. And psychologists tell us there's something called compassion fatigue. It's this thing where when we're constantly bombarded with all of the troubles of the world, then eventually we stop caring about any of the troubles of the world because we just can't keep a broken heart all of the time. And the sad thing is while we're so overwhelmed by the stuff going on 1,000 miles away or more, that is important and matters and is tragic and heartbreaking and horrible, we can't hold that all. We get overwhelmed and we shut down our heart to the needs of the person standing right next to us. We have to overcome that. We have to decide that we are going to take care of each other. See, I know that we often feel guilty about asking for help because our problems seem so small compared to all the world. But here's one of those frustrating little truths. Whatever hurts you, hurts you. It doesn't matter if it's huge or small. It hurts you. Whatever you're struggling with, you're struggling with. It doesn't matter if it's the greatest burden on the planet or just what you're having a hard time with. We are designed to care for one another. So I want to ask you, what if we chose to let God handle the problems 1,000 miles away and chose to let us be his instrument to help the person sitting in this room and in this community? What if we chose to let God reignite that compassion that has died out in us so that we can genuinely care for the people who are near us? What if we humbled ourselves enough to allow our brothers and sisters to know what our struggles and our burdens are? What if we choose to trust them with them? In other words, what if we allowed God to prove that what he says is true? For our own sake and for the sake of the world. Pray. God, I know that you love us. You've demonstrated again and again, and I know in our way we love each other. But we have accepted a lie that says that we don't need to share our burdens with each other. Either that's because nobody cares, or we don't want to hurt anyone, or we're worried they'll think we're weak. God, you have to overcome the lie. So I'm begging you to stir in our hearts today that compulsion to go share our burdens with others and ask for help. And then, God, stir in us again that compassionate heart so that we will help, so that we won't look at somebody's problems and say, it's too much for me, it's too much. Train us to think, man, if there's too much burden when somebody tells you what they need, maybe I need to get help for mine because maybe I'm just overwhelmed. Holy Spirit, I ask you to invade, infect, interweave yourself into our hearts and our minds and our lives so that we will be like you, carrying others' burdens. Thank you, God, for the fact that we can love each other so well that we love you, or we love each other like you love us. That the world will see that and say, wow, I don't know how you do that, but I want some of it. Help us to be the people who love so well that the world stands up and takes notice. You're awesome, and we love you. As we mentioned before, first Sunday of every month, we do what we call Decision Sunday. If you've been around church for a long time, you probably know what those typical decisions are, right? It's the decision to follow Christ, or it's the decision to be a member of a church. But I want to encourage you that no. There's so many more decisions that we need to make. Maybe the decision you need to make today is the decision to be more honest with the other people in this room and admit the struggle that you have and ask for help. Even if you don't know how they can help you, just say, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what you can do. Because the truth is, you're probably so overwhelmed that you don't realize how someone can help because you're trying to spin too many plates. Maybe the decision that you need to make today is about what you and God need to get back on the same page of. Hey God, I've been trying to be God here. I've been trying to be Lord of my life, and I need you to step up and knock me off my throne. The decisions that you make today can be all kinds of things. If you would like to, our elders are going to be around the room. They'd love to come talk to you. I'll be up in front if you want to talk to me. If you don't want to come to the front, I think I just saw Tom go to the back. Yep, he's in the back. He'd love to talk to you there. We just want to invite you to decide today to decide. Sound good? Stand with me as we sing.